In 2015, the digital customer portal of Dunkin' Donuts was attacked by hackers that ran an automated attack on the website's login process, where they were able to gain access to over 19,000 user accounts and steal customer rewards worth several $1,000s. For this attack, they used a list of previously leaked user credentials in combination with a brute force attack. This attack was possible as the customer's portal website suffered from a huge authentication vulnerability. But what are authentication vulnerabilities and what is a brute force attack? In this video, you will learn what kinds of authentication vulnerabilities there are and how the exploitation of them works. Also, I will introduce some important authentication best practices that will improve the security of your application's authentication process. What are authentication vulnerabilities? A broken authentication vulnerability is often the result of security misconfigurations, for example, regarding the login process. The NIST has listed countless vulnerabilities that can be considered of examples for a broken authentication. For example, the possibility to bypass an application authentication by tampering a cookie value to logged in. Authentication failures like this can occur in all different kinds of authentication mechanisms that are being used by different web applications. Because of this, identification and authorization failures are currently listed 7th on the OWASP top 10 list of web security vulnerabilities. But what exactly does a failure in the authentication process mean? The process of authentication describes the verification of the identity of the current user of a web application. In most cases, this process is usually done by the classic login form a user has to perform to access the website's functions. In this case, the authentication is done by the user entering their username or email address and a password. Additionally to that, nowadays many applications add a second layer of authentication to their authentication process. This is called multi-factor authentication and usually requires some kind of object the user needs to have, like an additional mobile application or security key. If those authentication mechanisms are poorly implemented and easy to attack or bypass, an authentication vulnerability occurs. In the next part of this video, I want to cover a few of the most common types of authentication vulnerabilities and how attackers can exploit them. The first type of attack that can be used against a vulnerable authentication mechanism is something I already mentioned in the intro of this video and is called brute force attack. Typically, this is an automated attack in which the attacker tries to guess any matching username and password combinations. To perform an attack like this, an attacker uses a list of possible usernames as well as often used passwords or any other possible passwords. By using special tools that use those provided lists, the attacker is able to perform a large amount of login attempts in a short amount of time. If there is no protection implemented against this type of attack, an attacker can theoretically repeat this type of attack until they run out of ideas for usernames or passwords to try. Another type of authentication vulnerability is called username enumeration. This could also help an attacker perform a brute force attack, as attackers can exploit this vulnerability to find out what usernames are valid and actually belong to a user profile. If this is successful, the attacker has a great list of valid usernames that can be used in a brute force attack. There are different ways to get the information for this list depending on how the website is configured. Usually, the attacker will try a bunch of different usernames and observe how the application reacts. If any of the usernames is actually valid and the authentication process of an application is vulnerable, this application can return any type of reaction that indicates the validity of the username. This could happen in form of either a HTTP status code that is different to the one that is being returned for a wrong username, a different response time when the website first checks if the username is valid and checks the password afterwards, resulting in a slightly longer response time in case of a valid username. Or error messages like this one that straight up tell the attacker that the account exists, but the password is incorrect. Another authentication vulnerability that makes attacks like a brute force attack much easier is when the application allows users to use weak or very popular passwords. Examples for that could be passwords that don't contain any uppercase characters, or numbers or special characters. Also, if the application allows using passwords like password1 or ABC123 that are incredibly common, a brute force attack gets much easier. NordPass has collected a whole list of the most commonly used passwords and how long it would take to crack it. I put a link to that list in the description of this video. Authentication vulnerabilities can also occur when the application uses multi-factor authentication methods. There are different ways to bypass a two-factor authentication. For example, let's say a website sends the user a PIN via SMS to complete the authentication process. Those verification codes are often rather short and are usually simply 4 to 6 digit numbers. This code can then be cracked by performing a brute force attack if there is no proper protection implemented. Also, if the two-factor verification logic is flawed itself, it can also be very easy to bypass the need for the authentication token after the initial login data has already been obtained. For example, by performing a brute force attack on the login credentials. Let's head into the demo part of this video where I show you a simple example of bypassing a poorly implemented two-factor authentication mechanism. Alright, welcome to the demo part of this video. For this demo, I'm using the Portswigger Web Security Academy lab. Those labs are deliberately insecure websites provided to practice web security attacks on a legal basis. If you want to check it out yourself, I will put a link in the description of this video that will take you through the Authentication Vulnerability labs on the page. So for this example, we have this web application where you have to complete a two-factor authentication process to log into your account. Let me show you how that looks like by logging into my own account first. And I'm just going to click login. And after entering my username as well as my password, I get redirected to this next page where I have to enter a 4-digit security code that was sent to the email address that is connected to that user profile. So the lab actually provides an email inbox as well. And if we refresh that page, here you can see that I got an email that tells me my security code is 1297. Now I can just copy that and head back into the authentication form on the other tab and enter it to log into my account. As you can see, I am now logged in as the user Wiener, which is my user profile. Up in the URL address bar, you can see that after entering the security code I got via email, the page redirected me to the My Account page. Alright, now I want to log in as another user with the username Carlos. So first I have to log out. I have already obtained his login credentials. In this case they were provided in the lab description, but let's say I was able to discover Carlos' password with a brute force attack, which was really easy because his password is just his last name. So it's Carlos Montoya. So now, as you can see, the problem is that I don't have access to Carlos' email account to retrieve the security code. So I need to find a way to bypass the two-factor authentication to get access to Carlos' account. As we learned earlier, after entering the security code, the application redirects us to the /myaccount page. So what we can try now is just simply navigating to this page ourselves. So we just switch the login to in the address bar to my account and hit enter. And as you can see, that actually worked. I also got the banner, "Congratulations, you solved the lab." The multi-factor authentication process of this application is so poorly designed that simply skipping the security code question was enough to log in as another user's account without having access to their authentication token. Alternatively to that, if the application doesn't have any protection implemented, we could have also tried to brute force the security code by using a program that automatically tries all possible 4-digit number combinations. So I hope this video helped you understand the theory of an authentication vulnerability a bit better. And now let's head back to the video, as you probably wonder what measures can be taken to improve the authentication process of your application to avoid vulnerabilities like this. There are a few things you should keep in mind when implementing the authentication process that should prevent any authentication vulnerabilities to arise. Earlier in this video, I listed some of the most common vulnerabilities, and I will now explain how those can be prevented. To avoid your application being vulnerable to brute force attacks, there are some simple countermeasures that can be implemented that should hinder an attacker using this method to obtain any login credentials. Since a brute force attack consists of an attacker repeatedly trying to log in with possibly valid credentials over and over again, the first step is to avoid this being possible in the first place. Implement a function that is called in case your system detects multiple login attempts in a short amount of time. Then you can choose one or some of the following options to handle this. You can try to lock the account that is being attacked if the attack targets a specific username. This way, nobody should be able to log into that account even if they get the password right. You can then contact the original owner of this account and inform them of the attack. Additionally, if you can trace back the origin IP of those repeated login attempts, you can block the IP from accessing your application at all. Last, you should make sure the user enters a captcha after a certain amount of failed login attempts. This way, you can prevent any automated attacks. Adding to the countermeasures against brute force attacks, you should also prevent attackers being able to easily get a list of valid usernames. Like previously explained, attackers can obtain this information by trying out a bunch of usernames in the login process and then observing the reaction of the application. To prevent this, make sure your application doesn't give any feedback on whether the username exists or not, but rather just returns a generic message that says either the username or the password is incorrect, regardless of the username existing or not. Another way to ensure your users' profiles are secured is by ensuring that they choose strong login credentials when creating their account. You should force the users to choose strong passwords that can't be easily guessed or found in the mentioned list of most used passwords. Follow the recommendation of the NIST organization and make sure that they have a minimum length of 8 characters, contain numbers and special characters, as well as lower and uppercase letters. Next, consider using any type of multi-factor authentication for your login process, as it adds an additional layer of security to your application. But make sure that it can't be easily bypassed, like in the example I showed earlier in this video. Just make sure that the application checks if the user provided the right security code before allowing them access to any other areas of the website. Also, to avoid an attacker guessing the right security code, implement brute force countermeasures like the ones mentioned earlier here as well. And last, consider using more complex security codes that are harder to guess. For example, at least 6-digit long security codes that contain numbers and characters. Don't forget that there are a lot more possible vulnerabilities that I can't cover in this video without it getting too long. But I will put a few links to resources in the description of this video where you can find any additional information. Especially the OWASP cheat sheet on authentication is a great overview of the most important aspects of authentication security. Now, to put everything together, I hope after watching this video you have a better understanding on what authentication vulnerabilities can look like. Authentication vulnerabilities can easily occur if the whole authentication process has any weak spots that were missed during the implementation. There are a number of aspects that have to be taken into consideration, but most importantly, you should always make sure to protect your application against brute force attacks by not allowing unlimited login attempts from a single source, as well as ensuring your users choose a strong password when they are signing up or changing their password. Also, choose a multi-factor authentication method, as it also adds a second layer of security, but make sure the process is not easily bypassed. You will find all the links to resources and websites I mentioned in this video in the description. If you're interested in learning more about web security, consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss out on any new uploads. Also, if you found this video helpful, please leave a like. Until then, I wish you a delightful day and see you soon in the next video. Goodbye.